So let's talk about all of this. Should police be defunded? Joining us live, actor and activist Kendrick Sampson and retired LAPD Sergeant Cheryl Dorsey. She is the author of Black and Blue, Volume 2, The Creation of a Social Advocate. Kendrick, I want to start with you. You were on our show recently. After you were on our show, you were part of a demonstration that ended up getting injured as part of that demonstration. Tell us a little bit about what happened and how are you doing tonight?
Yeah, I'm healing, working through that kind of trauma that people experience when they are brutalized by police. We had a very beautiful demonstration and peaceful demonstration that ended up getting violent because of police. The police shot us with rubber bullets, after our demonstration had ended. And I decided to record it. I got shot 7 times by rubber bullets. I have skin hanging off my legs still. But I'm healing. My assistant was beat to the point where they split his shin open and he had to get stitches. You could see his bone. My buddy Dion has 2 fractured bones in his skull and flap of skin hanging off of his face. So, that is the violence that the same, unnecessary aggression and violence that we see in the cases of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and so many others, and over 601 people that have been killed by police here in Los Angeles County.
So this was during one of those.
We're calling for defunding.
This is one of those initial protests that happened in the Fairfax District, and it was kind of wild to see this happen to you live on cable TV.
Yeah.
And we watched you, and I know a lot of us that know you were very concerned about you during that moment. Kendrick, defund the police. This is something you've talked about on this show before. Now it is just being talked about nationwide, and a lot of people are wondering, what exactly does that mean? What does defund the police mean? And then, Cheryl, I want to ask you that same question. Kendrick, let's start with you.
Well, me and Cheryl have talked a lot. Cheryl is, one of the only people on this coast, the only police officer that will speak out for the corruption in the police department. And that's what we're calling. A lot of people are like, well, what about good police and such? And we're like, if you were a good police officer, you would call out all the corruption in your police department, not try to separate yourself from George Floyd and what's happening with this movement. Defunding the police is saying that police are handling way too many situations that they shouldn't ever be required to handle, like mental health issues, wellness checks. They are run rampant in our schools and traumatize our children. We have not ever had a point in history where police and law enforcement in our communities, Black communities, indigenous communities, did not represent trauma, did not represent further oppression. And we're saying that the system is corrupt at its core. Its foundation is in slave catching, and we need a new system. And so reallocate those funds to systems that actually care for our communities, like non-law enforcement, unarmed first responders, or mental health care infrastructure that is culturally competent and trauma informed to help us heal from these things. Education, after school programs, housing. We have such a terrible housing problem here in Los Angeles. We have money to fix that problem. It's just in the wrong department because we're utilizing it to criminalize homeless folks instead of house them.
Cheryl, your thoughts?
When I listen to the mayor talk about defunding the police department and thus making it easier for folks to complain, it's so disingenuous. I mean, the mayor is saying that he's willing to take money away from the Los Angeles Police Department, and it's doing nothing but placating folks like Kendrick and others, because at the end of the day, they can fix this problem if they wanted to. All Eric Garcetti has to do is compel his police chief, Michael Moore, to get rid of bad officers, much like police chiefs across the country. That's such a simple and easy thing to do. Why would you throw the baby out with the bathwater? I believe that there are more good officers out there than there are the ones that are garnering all the attention. And so let's deal with those guys. When I joined the Los Angeles Police Department in 1980, we had something called the Mental Evaluation Unit, where we had professionals who went out with police officers in tandem to deal with people who were having mental episodes. PCP was a big thing, and it was thought that everybody on PCP must be mental. So there's a way to do this. We've done it before. Community-based policing. Why would you do everything but hold officers accountable who are brutalizing folks like Kendrick and others? They're out there. They live for this. Get them off the job.
Cheryl, you and I have talked about this for a long time, and I don't disagree with anything you said. My concern is that I've worked in the mental health piece of this for years. You've worked on the law enforcement piece for years. There is overlap, but there's also distinct differences. You can't send social work out there when things have become aggressive or violent or unraveled. You have to bring the mental health piece in literally years earlier. There's no doubt we need a lot of mental health resources. But to throw that word around as something that's a substitute for law enforcement, I don't think people quite get what they're talking about.
I agree, and that's why, I referenced my early time on the LAPD when we had professionals who were connected, if you will, with our police officers who worked, and I'm going to date myself, in Parker Center, right? Mental evaluation unit. We had folks who would respond with us. Because
I remember I used to call that unit. It was a great unit, right? It was terrific.
Right.
And you had the time and the resource to sit and evaluate somebody. And I know there's other law enforcement around Southern California that have social workers that go out with the officers, and it works. But it works in combination with law enforcement. So I'm just not quite sure what everyone envisions as the model for how we're going to do this.
It has to be a combined effort, because what's going to happen if you have a healthcare professional go out and the person is violent and aggressive and they're fearful, they're going to need someone to help calm the situation, de-escalate, defuse. That's what police are trained to do. Those who don't quite get it and don't understand, well, we need to get them off the job. But to just summarily say that, we're going to take money away and somehow that's going to make it easier and better, we have situations in place already on the police department where you can go and complain. What happens when you make that complaint and you tell Mike Moore and he says, thank you, and does nothing?
Kendrick, one of the great. Let me get you in here.
I don't agree with any of this. This is my thing: is they have had so many times and so much time and effort towards reform. They have taken on a lot of the reforms that have been suggested in certain campaigns, like this 8 Can't Wait. Right now in LA, it's 3 Can't Wait. They've already taken on 5 of these reforms that they've done studies on and said that these will help with de-escalating the situation and help them not kill folks. And LAPD continues to do that. The problem with that I see is that the LAPD does not want to, and they're protected by police unions that have immense power, that do not operate as organized labor. They operate as organized crime. They are protected by so many things, and the problem is the actual system. And when we're talking about defunding the police, we're talking about taking that money away from them and putting it towards new systems, reimagining the way that we look at law enforcement and the way that we look at the problems that law enforcement is required to handle, that they are not equipped to handle, and that they continue to make worse.
Right. So the question, Kendrick, I think for a lot of people, because now I think a lot of people are listening to your message, right? And the exciting thing about this show is that we have a lot of different views on this show. We give everybody a chance to talk. We had the police union on last week. We also had the sheriff called in, and he argued, Sheriff Elex Michaelson of LA County, of why he thinks that this could be a problem. Take a listen to what he has to say, and then I want you to respond.
To cut our budget means we're going to be withdrawing people from patrol, from our jails, and that's going to harm the community. Longer response times, crimes that won't be solved. That means that the suspects will remain out there inflicting more harm on more victims, and that's a direct impact to public safety.
Okay, so Kendrick, lay it out for us. If this system that you want goes into place, what exactly does that look like? And if there is a crime, say there's a murder or somebody's looting or something happens, how is it dealt with?
Alex Villanueva is full of shit. He's been full of shit for a long time. He made all these promises and he did not. He did the exact opposite. He talked about getting ICE out of the department. He replaced it with an ICE equivalent. He's very disingenuous. The threat to public safety is actually policing. It has been since its inception as slave catching, and it continues to be.
So if there's a crime, Kendrick, there's a crime. What happens?
I will answer the question. Okay. I got you.
Okay.
When you're talking about getting to violent crimes, You can fund violence intervention programs and such. You can finance systems that are outside of the policing system. I don't know why we're in Hollywood and we can't imagine something better than this system. We have no imagination. We have such a low bar, but there are examples of this all over the country that are not funded well, of alternatives to sending in a military with guns or a militarized officer with guns and other weapons to handle situations that it's unnecessary. That, like in the case of Breonna Taylor, they busted in our house and shot it up 22 times, released 22 rounds, 8 landed in her, killed her, and they had already caught the suspect earlier that day, which shows that they didn't need all that artillery in the first place. So when you're talking about murder and violent crimes, they do not make up the majority of the calls that police are responding to. And you can have small tactical units that are not police that work on those particular problems. But you're asking for a one-size-fits-all for wellness checks, mental health checks, mental health problems, substance abuse, and a bunch of small petty crimes that don't require, and traffic violations that don't require a gun to hold people accountable. The problem is that the system has nothing to do with accountability. It has to do with oppression, and it has to do with continuing to traumatize our communities because its foundation is rotten at its core. In church, they say a bad seed produces a bad tree, produces bad fruit. A good seed produces a good tree that produces good fruit. The seed is slave catching. The seed of policing is slave catching, and it was not ever intended to hold anybody accountable or to make our communities well, which is why it continues to discriminate and traumatize and terrorize our communities.
Kendrick, thank you very much for sharing your views. It's amazing in just a few weeks how many more people have now agree with you than just a few weeks ago. It is amazing to see what's happening in this country. It's an important perspective to hear from you. Cheryl, an important perspective to hear from you. We're appreciative to hear from a lot of different perspectives, including the police here. And this is a place where we love to have these debates. Thank you very much. Great to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you.